Welcome to Postwave. You're here with Eric and Trevor, and today we're talking about the intellectual dark web.
Just a quick disclaimer that we're two musicians and composers who like to talk about a bunch of topics that are sometimes slightly beyond our wheelhouse. If we say anything that's factually incorrect, or even if you just disagree with us, we really love if you send us an email at postwavepodcast@gmail.com and let us know.
Trevor, what's the intellectual dark web?
So the term itself, intellectual dark web, was coined by this guy, Eric Weinstein, who is this... Actually, he's a mathematician by training, but he does a bunch of different things. And it was a term coined to describe this kind of loose-knit, not even like explicitly associated with each other group of people who describe themselves as public intellectuals, which is one of the terms I find just a little bit pretentious, even if I think it's, true. And so, I mean, just like a short list. I mean, people debate who's actually a part of it, but definitely like Eric Weinstein, and then his brother Brett Weinstein, who's a biology professor, biologist, and then also Jordan Peterson, who probably a lot of people have also heard of, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, Sam Harris, and I don't know if Joe Rogan's really considered part of it, but he, like, through his podcast has had most of these people on to talk with it at one point or another. And so it all kind of revolves around what I feel like is a backlash to a lot of the kind of quote unquote political correctness, SJW type stuff that's become really prominent in the past decade or so.
So do you feel that is legitimately what this is about? It's a backlash, and two-part question. One, is this a backlash? And two, is it a backlash against political correctness and social justice warriors and that kind of stuff?
I don't know about social justice warriors specifically, but it's definitely backlash against the fact that there are certain the perception that there are certain things you just don't talk about, or certain things you don't debate, even though they might be opinions that a lot of people actually hold in private. That, especially because the media is so, as a whole, like pretty left leaning, which, I don't think I see as much of a problem with it as they do, but I definitely think it's a little bit of a problem. But yeah, I think that's kind of at the core of it. Again, as a whole, because the various people have very different opinions, or can have very different opinions.
Yeah, so in this video you sent me, Ben Shapiro talks about how perception of the intellectual dark web is sort of perceived in the media as rabid right-wing nut jobs. Whereas the majority of the people in the group are progressive in some way or another. Yeah.
So, which is really interesting because, and I think this gets back to kind of the whole IDW thing being a backlash against, quote unquote, political correctness. Because if it's not a backlash, I mean, maybe there is something to it being a backlash against social justice warriors. I'm tempted to keep saying quote unquote, but it'll get annoying. So. Because I think the majority of these people, I think, would consider themselves like centrists or classical liberals or something like that. Which they would probably describe to mean that, they support, gay rights and black rights and racial justice and all that stuff. They just think the left as a whole is taking it too far and being too extreme about it. And then there are legitimately conservative people like Ben Shapiro, but I think Dave Rubin, although I kind of don't even pay attention to him at all because I just get the impression that he's kind of this is kind of a tool, but
yeah. So where do you think that impression comes from of the media perceiving this as being a right-wing sort of movement when it's largely left centralists?
Right. Well, it's definitely right of where the left is as a whole right now, if that makes sense. Like if you think about like the New York Times, which most people would probably consider to be a pretty objective, center source and not super biased. Like it's especially recently, as more and more people from our generation have started working there and influencing it. It's definitely gone pretty far left. So it's definitely right leaning relative to where the left is right now.
So I kind of take issue with this language of left and right, and even as a spectrum where it's like you can go further to an extreme and that's more left. Like that doesn't really track with me with the actual situation. And I'm especially concerned about the language that groups people into certain like identities based on where they are on that spectrum. Like if you are on a certain spot, then you have a set of beliefs. And if you're further along, maybe you have more extreme beliefs, but you have to believe these certain things in order to be that place on the spectrum. That doesn't work to me. That's red flags.
Yeah, and I think most people in the IDW would kind of agree with that. Like, kind of along those lines, like if you think about it, it is kind of weird that we group things like abortion and climate change together. Yeah. Right? Like if you're on the right, you have to believe that abortion is evil and that global warming doesn't exist for some reason. I mean, like abortion because of Christianity, but again, like the Bible, I don't think really has an opinion on,
God damn it, the earth is 6,000 years old.
All right, I was going to say, I have an opinion on when, consciousness begins in the fetus or whatever, when, it can feel pain. So yeah, that the idea that that everyone's ideologies should fit neatly onto this kind of one-dimensional spectrum is kind of counterproductive.
I think we also have to be especially careful when we're talking about these things to notice when someone is drawing the conclusion that X group of people, whether it's a political ideology or where they are on this left-right spectrum, that they are the problem. And for me, I'm of two minds here, and one mind says, God damn it, it's just Ben Shapiro being the loudmouth right-wing conservative hijacking this so-called movement or a group of people and making it about it's the rabid left that's the problem, and the reaction in the media against this group as being right-wing is because of him in particular stirring up that angle. Now that's one, I feel like that has to be a part of it, but that's only half of what I think is probably the situation, and maybe we'll get into the other half in a second.
Yeah, so we'll link to this Ben Shapiro video that we both watched, which is kind of just an overview of interviews with a bunch of different people. But maybe it would help to go a little bit into the history of the whole thing.
Yeah, please.
So it was coined by this guy Eric Weinstein, who I think I mentioned is a mathematician, and he actually the most recent thing he's kind of been in the news for is he came up with a theory of everything.
Okay.
Called geometric unity, and you can go there's videos of him lecturing on it on YouTube for like 3 or 4 hours or something.
Okay.
And it's still kind of impenetrable. But anyway, I think he coined it kind of offhandedly, maybe a little tongue in cheek. And I think it's a really stupid name because like the dark web is where you go to get like illegal porn and like do illegal things and like
buy meth sculptures and stolen private jets.
Yeah, and commit fraud and it's just like I just think it's a dumb name.
Noted.
So he was kind of the one who coined it, and I forget exactly how it's related, but so his brother Brett Weinstein was at the center of one of these kind of campus culture kind of firestorm things where there was I think, see if I can get the story right. So I think there was some kind of day where it was the tradition for students of color to stay home to kind of, on a certain day to represent, to kind of represent what they added to the community.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I think in 2017, this was at, he was a biology professor at Evergreen College, which is this pretty famously like left-leaning school in Washington. Mm. And so they had this day that was traditionally that the students of color would stay home to kind of represent what they were adding to the community. And in 2017, people at the school decided that the right thing to do would be to have all the white students stay home. Mm. And of course, the students of color staying home was voluntary, and the white students staying home seemed like it was kind of going to be enforced, or like it was kind of compulsory.
Weird.
Yeah. I mean, not like, at gunpoint or anything, but like, I think, the implication was if you don't stay home, you're a bad person, like that kind of thing.
Strange.
Yeah. And so he didn't think that was right and like wrote a letter to the school or something. And it ended up being this huge controversy, and I think he ended up leaving the school. So he was kind of at the center of one of these campus controversies that have happened over the past decade or so. Most of which have involved like speakers getting canceled that were supposed to speak at the school, things like that.
Mm-hmm. And so that turned into the intellectual dark web.
Yeah. Again, okay. Yeah. So the term intellectual dark web was coined kind of as a direct response to that incident at Evergreen.
Mm. And from there, they just sort of started incorporating more members with larger audience spaces. Yeah, well, I think it kind of already existed. Like the network itself already existed. And the interesting thing is that it is kind of centered around this medium of podcasting. Mm. What do you think that is?
I think there are definitely a few reasons. I mean, one of the big catalysts was definitely Joe Rogan's podcast, which has been around for a long time and just has a just insanely huge audience.
Right.
Yeah. And I think what podcasting offers that's unique is it's, at least for the kind of podcasts like we're doing where it's, an hour or more of two people just talking to each other or three people, is that it's a really in-depth look at a certain topic that couldn't really be expressed, in a sound bite or, in a 10-minute video or that kind of thing.
So you have more time to get into the nuances of the situation.
Exactly. Yeah. And kind of work out any disagreements that might be there. Mm. And, it's like the closest thing that exists to that in mainstream media outside of, actual like presidential debates and debates like political debates, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Usually it's, just like the five talking heads on CNN, right. Who each get like a minute to say their bit and they have to make it short and punchy and it's all very kind of surface level and not super in depth.
Yeah. Well, okay. This segues into something that I wanted to discuss. So
I guess, could I say one more thing?
Of course.
That?
Yeah.
So, I think what it also contrasts with is social media. I mean, definitely Twitter, which is just kind of reactionary, people firing off, or I shouldn't say reactionary people firing off reactionary responses to very short condensed statements. And even Facebook, where you can post longer, more in-depth things, but everything is still happening. Like you're having a conversation with somebody, but it's like public in real time. People can kind of interject, at any point, and everyone can see what you're saying. So there's like incentive to not, stir the pot too much.
Yeah, and there's constantly new material being added. The feed just keeps on going. So there's that tempo that kind of pushes you forward. Like there's a limited amount of time to say the thing you're trying to say before it's no longer relevant.
Right. And if you say something that's, that most of your friends would find controversial, then you'll end up having like a pile-on thing where everyone will just, there'll be like 50 comments saying how wrong you are.
Yeah.
And like, yeah.
So since we just did an episode on The Idiot by Dostoevsky, I listened through the audiobook of that whole thing leading up to the episode, and there's this moment that I remember from the first time I read the book as well, just really popped out to me. I said, oh shit, that's so true and relevant to my own situation here in Boulder, Colorado. And what it was this character, Yevgenia Pavlovich, who's this sort of conservative windbag character, but he starts talking about Russian liberalism and how he thinks there's no such thing as true Russian liberalism because in Russia, the Liberal Party, when someone disagrees with you, the thing is to attack that person. If the person disagrees with you, the person becomes discredited in your eyes and you're just trying to put the person down. And furthermore, whatever they're saying, it doesn't matter the particulars of the situation, even if you're wrong, because what really matters is making a statement, some grand ideological statement about general concepts that seem related to that situation. Do you think that's true? Have you experienced that?
I don't know if I've experienced that personally, but I definitely get the idea, and I definitely see how that applies here.
Yeah.
Although I don't know if this is exactly what you're saying, but it does kind of get to the criticism that people are just going having conversations with each other based more on ideology than on their own thinking. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And then even going further, if someone brings up an idea that isn't one of the main talking points, that you're also in the same way discredited for not talking about the thing that you're supposed to be talking about. Now this sounds exactly like what Ben Shapiro is talking about and blaming the left and it's all the liberals' fault. But for me, I've actually experienced this firsthand living in Boulder, Colorado, which is very hyper extremist liberal, I would say. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, as a whole, I mean, there are lots of rich people living there too, which I think on the whole might tend to be a little bit more conservative than Boulder's image would suggest, but.
Yeah. But it has the core of the university there, and I think also a lot of innovation culture, which lends itself to pretty well-off people who like to show that they drive their electric cars around and drink almond milk lattes rather than whatever.
Yeah.
It's funny because when you're in it, you don't notice it so much, or at least me personally, I didn't see it as unusual. It was just, that's the way things are. These are the people that make up the world around me. But after having left that situation, looking back and noticing that was really pretty repressive, that the way that you're discouraged and discredited if you talk about things other than the main agreed upon talking points.
Yeah, I mean, like what specific situations did you experience that in?
So me personally,
That you're comfortable talking about.
okay, this is a little bit controversial, and I think a lot of my friends may disagree with me on this. Do you remember there was that big old scandal in Colorado? There was like a cake maker, and there was a gay couple who wanted to hire the cake maker to custom decorate a wedding cake and to put two male sculptures on it. And the cake maker said, I don't really want to do that because it's contrary to my beliefs. And there's everyone got really mad, and they're like, God damn it, you better make that fucking cake. We're going to go march around outside your cake shop and show you're a shithead. Do you remember that?
I do. I forgot that was in Colorado.
Yeah. In fact, I believe some people in my social circle actually went down to the cake shop. They took a road trip, drove a few hours to go protest outside the cake shop.
Do you remember which year this was?
That would have been 2017, 2018.
Okay, so that was like our last year of school.
After it was when I was working in the coffee shop.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that explains why I don't remember anyone going down there or over there, whatever.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like I happened to have the opinion that while I very much disagree with this guy's conviction about homosexuality, it's not my or anyone's place to tell him that he has to create a thing that expresses a particular idea. And I shared that idea, and of course was shot down for even mentioning a different idea than the consensus.
Yeah. I mean, I think I have to agree with you on that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I mean I mean, I think the solution is if you disagree with them, publicize that this specific cake, bakery, whatever, is conservative and doesn't think gay people should get married, and then just ask as many people who live there to boycott the place as you can, and
Yeah. Oh.
I mean, there is the. I mean, I think part of the argument was that was like the only, like, wasn't part of the thing that it was like kind of a small town and that was like the only cake maker within a certain radius or something.
I don't know. I don't think that matters at all. It's like you can't make But anyway, it's about it's that same situation where you have this thing that looks like it's like making some grand statement, political statement. And it seems like this is an affront to gay rights and stuff like that, and it's a huge regression if this is allowed to go forward as it is. And yet, if you look at the actual situation, the details of it don't represent the ideological message that people are trying to say.
I don't know about that. I guess I have to unpack a little bit what you mean, because what do you think they're actually trying to say?
Well, what I remember, a lot of the opposition to the cake maker was kind of taking the stance that if you let this guy say he's not going to make a cake for gay people and you make that legal, then that opens the door legally for people to discriminate against gay people in all sorts of other ways. Right.
Like I'm not going to serve you at this restaurant because you're gay.
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. But there's the obvious argument that doesn't involve like direct celebration or aiding and gay marriage or whatever.
Exactly. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is my point, that it's a totally different thing, and yet it was being presented as a slippery slope scenario where it's all sort of the same.
Yeah. No, I see your point there. Yeah, again, I'm equally uncomfortable like coming down on that side of that particular argument. But yeah, I get your point. Yeah, this might be a useful place for us to talk about the idea of privilege and specifically cis straight white male privilege.
What? Who, me?
You on the screen.
Well, yes.
I think part of the problem with all this stuff is that it's become kind of a meme. You know?
What do you mean?
Well, like, first it's just, white privilege, then it's male white privilege, then it's straight white male privilege, and then it's cis straight white male privilege. You're just kind of adding on, like tacking on more and more things onto the same concept, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
In the same way people will, make jokes about how first it was, LGBT, then it's LGBTQ, and there's like, letters that just keep getting added on. And in both situations, I totally understand. Like, I don't think it's like, I totally get the reason that we have to keep, qualifying all these things because reality is complicated and there are lots of things to consider. Right. But it does kind of make these things hard to talk about because a lot of people will just kind of put up a wall immediately and be like, oh, you just want to be like, politically correct about everything. And, I have to walk on pins and needles to even have this conversation and et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I think there is a question around, like, is it useful for two people like us to be having these kinds of conversations?
Because we're privileged.
Yeah, because we're cis straight white males.
What aspect of this conversation would lend itself to that we shouldn't do it because of that? Because we're talking about people who have less of those privileges. Yeah,
well, and a lot of the IDW stuff kind of revolves around a backlash against all this social justice stuff. And like as I mentioned, I think, I don't know about Ben Shapiro, but I think pretty much everyone else is like pro gay marriage. If you ask them, probably pro trans rights, although that's like trans rights are kind of like the sticking point for a lot of these people. Which I'll say is definitely among the things that I disagree with them about, and I think is pretty harmful about the whole thing. And and they're all, a lot of them, I think most of them have had pretty strong reactions against all the the protests that were happening this year, that kind of thing. So yeah, so the whole IDW thing is very tied up in like trans rights and black rights, that whole thing. Yeah, that's why I think it's relevant.
I see. But I feel like if a privileged person is speaking in opposition to people expressing themselves and the people who are of less privileged or differently privileged groups expressing themselves, then certainly there's a problem there. Again, if it's in opposition to them expressing themselves. Short of that, I think it totally makes sense to share your ideas regardless of your position. In this video, Sam Harris says, rationality is the mode of thinking where it doesn't matter who you are to come to the right answer. And I don't think this is wholly conclusive. I think that maybe there are aspects of the situation that you can't see from a privileged situation. You can only really know by experiencing the other side of it. But I think there is a kernel of truth here that rationality, you can contribute to a meaningful discussion even if you aren't privy to both sides or all sides of the situation.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Although this kind of gets into the more radical far left stuff about, even the concept of rationality is, I don't know exactly what they would say. This is kind of critical theory stuff. Have you heard of
critical theory? No, what is that?
Okay, so basically the gist of it is that it's focused on revealing and challenging power structures.
Could you elaborate a little on that?
Yeah, so it's the whole like, dismantle the patriarchy. Society is built on white male patriarchy, that kind of thing. And that white male patriarchy has infiltrated almost every part of society. It can be found almost everywhere, which, it is definitely true in a lot of places. Like I can see, that argument does have some credence.
But that maybe it's not the only valuable talking point, and to have a richer discussion would require deviating from that language and maybe embracing ideas shared by people who you might disagree with on a lot of points.
Yeah.
For example, do you have written down, what was the name of the one woman who was a member of this video?
Oh yeah, Christina Hoff Sommers.
Yeah, so in this video, Christina Hoff Sommers puts forward the idea that she mentions that she doesn't want to use the word patriarchy anymore, and instead says that there's other elements of the situation that could be addressed, which, for example, men being neglected in the homes and in the schools, in places where men are struggling, there are not, or boys are struggling, there are not support systems to help them through that, whereas there has been a strong step forward in supporting girls in similar areas. And she says that the steps forward that feminism has made to helping women is amazing and has done a lot of positive stuff, and that maybe it would be more helpful now to also focus on providing the same support systems for men and boys.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. By the way, I think she's the mother-in-law of Tamler Sommers, one of the very, very bad wizards guys.
Oh, hey.
Guys, which is why they have like an annual Thanksgiving like conversation debate, because they're like on pretty opposite sides of things.
Wow. Yeah, and that was so interesting to me, because there's some things that she said, like she really seems to believe in traditional gender roles and, like, standard families with the man of the house and the women. And I don't necessarily accept that as being a gold standard, but that doesn't stop me from appreciating the value of these ideas that she's sharing.
Yeah, I think part of her point is that not all boys growing up are the same, and we can't treat everyone the same, and some boys need different things than others do. It also kind of gets to, I feel like this is a pretty common kind of argument among people in IDW. Just like, I agree with feminism, or I agree with social justice, but at this point right now it's going too far. Like, the stuff from the past was good,
right,
but we actually need to like roll it back a little bit now, because it's actually harming things, which I'm wary of that kind of argument.
Yeah. So that's a really good point, because I do get the sense that a lot of the members of this group hold that sort of stance. And I wonder if maybe we could put a finer point on why they believe that, and that maybe there's a kernel of truth there, despite them coming to this, what I would consider a wrong conclusion. And so I want to unpack that a little bit. Why do they feel this way? What makes this reaction against the political extremists, specifically on the left? And what I think it comes down to is not any particular topic of conversation going too far that's the problem. It's more the mode of conversation, where when someone disagrees with you, that person is instantly shot down. I was touching on this a little bit earlier. It's kind of remarkable to me that this novel written in the 18th century by Dostoevsky in Russia so aptly describes the exact same situation that feels like so relevant specifically to our time right now.
19th century though, right?
19th century, is that it? I was
1800s.
Right? Yeah. I get that mixed up sometimes. So I have to slow down here because I think there's I think that all across the board, there's a tendency for people to group other people into groups and then judge them based on that grouping.
Definitely.
And this is kind of like a straw man situation. I'll give you an example. You have the people like Ben Shapiro who are saying, it's these liberals, they're...
I'm really impressed how good your Ben Shapiro impression is after like was this like your first time hearing him talk?
Yeah. Yes. So Ben Shapiro harps on liberals for wanting to be politically correct and embracing censorship, and so sort of vilifies the left as being the problem. This is the culprit of why we can't have a meaningful conversation. But I think this is a bit of a straw man, even though it's true that there are extremists who embrace the ideology of censoring people who disagree with them, as we've just discussed. Even though there are extremists, I think the majority of people don't care about that. You hear this term politically, PC. Only Republicans say that term, and
well, I mean, I don't know about that.
Okay, maybe not, but that personally, that's where I've heard it. So it's may often be true, but I think it's misunderstanding the core honest intention behind that impulse of political correctness, which is caring about creating a nurturing environment for all people, even the misfits, even the weird gay people who everyone hates because they're not like us,
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that is, that is the goal.
Mm-hmm. I think, and it's that impulse that's behind the more extreme embracing of censorship and stuff. And I don't think most people really do embrace censorship and political correctness in that sense.
Yeah, well, and it's also a complicated issue what exactly we mean by censorship.
Yeah, and
right, because it's changed a lot recently because now Twitter is like labeling tweets by Donald Trump, that kind of thing, as being factually inaccurate. And I mean, one of the other big things that happened, I think, recently was that Alex Jones got kicked off Facebook. I mean, those are really extreme examples. Alex Jones in particular, because he's just so like
full of shit,
off his rocker. Yeah. But yeah, it's like, you can still have a website where you can put pretty much anything you want, write any opinions that you want. And, you can probably still post whatever you want on Twitter or Facebook. It's more, I think part of it though is it connects to people, losing their jobs because they have certain beliefs, which I don't, I can't really speak to how often that happens really. But I think that is kind of where people complain about the whole censorship question.
Yeah. And I think it's undeniable that there are certain situations where it really does go off the rails. And I think it's specifically that mode of conversation that shuts people down for contributing in the wrong way.
Right. If you're enjoying what you're listening to so far and you want to support us somehow, there's lots of ways you can do that. You can go follow us on Facebook or Instagram, or visit us online at postwavepodcast.com, or send us a nice email at postwavepodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on your podcasting platform of choice. We're on pretty much everyone out there. Give us a nice review if you're on a platform that supports that, or a 5-star rating. Thanks for listening. So I feel like this all connects to this idea of bad faith that people will bring up a lot.
Can you go a little bit more into that?
Yeah. So this is another one of my criticisms of the IDW, is that they talk so much about the value of conversation and solving problems, and about how people only, people are stuck in their little bubbles and they only talk to people who agree with them, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But then I think specifically, well, Joe Rogan and Sam Harris specifically, I've heard talk about how there are certain people they just don't think it's worthwhile having conversations with.
Yeah.
Because they're kind of out to get the other person, or they're just so far beyond being convinced of anything that it's not really useful to try to change their mind. And all the other person's really going to do is just try to make them look bad and get some kind of gotcha moment where it's like, oh, you're racist or you're sexist or, whatever.
There isn't the good faith that you're there to have a meaningful discussion and to engage in intellectualism.
Right.
I totally agree with that. That was what I was driving towards, actually.
Cool.
And although, to put a broader point on that, maybe a bad faith situation could go beyond the, particularly they're out to get you, toward sharing a particular agenda, where you have a particular idea or set of ideas that you hold to be true despite any rational reason, and you're going to put that idea forward as if it's being intellectual, when in reality it's just your personal convictions, which I think I can't entirely criticize that, because I think that's part of how discussion happens. Every idea that you put out there doesn't have to be a good idea. It doesn't have to be right. That's the point of the discussion. You bring it out there for people to air it and examine it and see where it has merits and where it doesn't.
Yeah. I think part of that is how you distinguish something being quote unquote intellectual and something being a personal conviction. Because a lot of this, I mean, that's literally what critical theory is. It's this very academic take on all these ideas, and then it has a lot of, it's definitely intellectual, Yeah, but people can still hold those ideas as personal convictions that they're not gonna change, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's not the good faith that they are willing to allow their own ideas to be changed. Yeah. So why do you think that is? How do we get to this sort of landscape that almost seems to encourage that sort of reactionism?
Well, I think it's really interesting, and part of the reason I think it's good for people like us to be having this conversation is that I think we kind of came of age right in the middle of it. All these speakers getting canceled at schools, and the whole IDW thing, and this kind of backlash against, what was seen as far left social justice stuff that was happening literally as we went through college. And I remember having these long Skype conversations with my girlfriend Maddie. We were long distance all throughout college, and she was on Tumblr, where all this stuff was, all this far left stuff was kind of being passed around. And I remember just having long talks / debates / arguments about a lot of this stuff. And it started with the whole cultural appropriation thing, because that pretty relevant, being a composer.
Yeah.
At a music school. Yeah. So I think part of the reason that it's our generation is because of social media and the internet, because we're we were kind of one of the first generations that's grown up with that, at least since we were in high school, right? I don't know how early you got on
I think middle school,
Facebook and social media. Yeah. I only got one, I think, my freshman year of high school. But yeah, we from a fairly early age, it's had some kind of influence over our lives. And I think that, we know that it kind of silos people into different categories based on what they believe and creates these bubbles and these echo chambers where people can kind of have their beliefs become more and more, extreme and kind of concentrated. And at the same time, on like YouTube, they've, I think, probably changed the algorithm at this point because it's I feel like it's a pretty well-known thing now that those algorithms were like pushing people down extreme rabbit holes. But I think all that kind of stuff has contributed to that happening at this particular time.
I think you're totally right. And I think there's another element we have to consider as well, which is politics and media exploration of politics. Like you were saying, there's like the 5 guys on CNN talking about whatever, and they have their 1 minute to get their idea in. And I think it's so much more intensified by the fact that every single one of those bastards is paid off, like there's lobbyists who pay a lot of money to have particular politicians or media entities say particular ideas, and so it's like that's what their job is to say to push forward a particular idea regardless of how true that idea is or who that idea benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's harmful on its own,
really,
because because all that's doing is motivating them to put forth the best argument that they possibly can for whatever position it is. Don't you think?
I don't think so. I think because of the way because of the reactionary culture that we have, it's not about putting forth the best arguments. People don't really care about that. It's about putting forward the loudest arguments, the one that sounds good. It's about speaking eloquently even if you don't have anything to say, just to make yourself sound better than the other guy.
Yeah, or putting forth the most like emotionally wrenching, convincing argument, exactly. If not necessarily the tightest one.
And it's with an ulterior motive. It's not honest. It's not something that they believe inherently.
Right.
Just say as well, I think this also explains the element of the culture that will criticize people for saying things other than the main talking points. Like, there's one thing where if you disagree with the main talking point, you get ostracized. But there's another where if you talk about something that's a different topic than some of the things that you're supposed to be talking about, then it's almost worse, or it's almost just as bad, and you can be criticized for that. And I think it's like this sense that there isn't enough time to get your idea out there, and like there's the stage and you have to present these particular ideas on the stage at this time because there won't be another opportunity. And I think that that's true about these media politic situations where you just have your minute of soundbite to put forward your platform's idea,
Yeah, I mean, I've never personally experienced like being criticized for saying something that's off topic, but I
have.
Again, I haven't been in a whole lot of real world conversations or like any conversations about this kind of thing, except for with like Maddie.
Yeah.
And maybe like once or twice with other friends. But I feel like it's less being off topic, and it's like two things, I guess. So like, one, by saying something that's not like a main talking point, you risk saying something that's just slightly wrong or like takes slightly the wrong stance on something,
Ooh.
Like it assumes something that's that's a little bit problematic or like neglects something, or
are you saying that it
like that
actually
kind of
does, or that that's the impression that a lot of reactionary people hold?
I guess that's an open question. I mean, according to whoever, according to the ideology of whoever you're talking to, it would be correct that it's misplacing something, or making a bad assumption, or
can I give you an example of a situation this happened to me?
Sure.
At the coffee shop in Boulder when I was working there, which I hated, by the way. Everyone's so rude. All the rich people who think they know better than you, and loser. What are you behind the counter? You're not even making $100,000. What are you, some poser? Anyway, what was I talking about? Right. So when I was working at the coffee shop, after having come back from the Netherlands, where I spent a semester abroad, and I learned in the Netherlands that a lot of people in Europe, generally, the consensus of the word racist is that it refers specifically to the extremist sort of almost eugenicist racial superiority, where you think your race is better than other people's races, like inherently, and anything
right, like white supremacy,
exactly. And anything short of that, it may be problematic, but it's not racism. And I think that this may be a valuable. I think that this may be a valuable way to talk about this issue, because, for example, you have in America, you have these tense sort of situations that arise from having people of different heritages with the violent background that we do have of subjugation, and being forced to share a space together with that heritage. And you have, like, for example, a lot of white people who just don't know about, like, they know that slavery happened, but they don't know the impact that can have on a person even generations later. They don't know the daily struggles that someone in the position of the African Americans have. And so they act callously and stupidly, unaware of how that can actually hurt people who are trying to make a reasonable statement. And that's not the same thing as going around with white caps and saying we're better than you. It's just ignorance. I guess I was also thinking about a situation in a hypothetical situation in. Did you ever watch that Netflix show Dear White People?
No.
Well, it deals with these concepts, and it's like black students in white preppy Ivy League college, and there's like one of the main characters is a black woman who talks about her challenges living in this sort of environment, and she has this radio show she calls Dear White People, where she sort of shows these sort of in unawarenesses of her white colleagues about her situation. And then, of course, there's like the white people who have the white boys who have the college like newspaper, and then they like do a party and they call it Dear Black People, and it's like really cringy stuff, but like,
yeah.
I think exploring real things that actually tend to happen in this country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the people ask why we don't have a White History Month.
Oh, fuck. Yeah, just like that.
Yeah. Or Straight Pride Month.
Fucking hell.
But yeah, to go back to kind of what you were saying about the term racist and all that, I definitely agree that the term has kind of lost some of its weight because it gets applied to so many things.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of a specific example. I was gonna say saying capitalism is racist, that kind of thing.
Yeah, or like white people celebrating Cinco de Mayo.
I think that's a whole different category of things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but maybe not racist, just like uneducated.
Oh yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah. Of course, it's a fine line, because if there was some Cinco de Mayo celebration being put on by actual Hispanic people, that was like a citywide thing, like I don't think anyone would consider it racist for you as a white person to go to that.
No, of course.
Right. But it's like, oh, let's throw a Cinco de Mayo party, and as a bunch of white people, and all get our paint our faces and wear sombreros and
well,
all that stuff.
There's definitely gradients.
Yeah,
but like even just like drinking and eating tacos on, like, maybe you don't have to wear the sombreros and paint your faces, but like if you just drink a bunch and make a big deal about it, then that I mean, I don't think that's racist. That's I mean, it's celebratory. You're not making any caricatures or anything. You're not displaying a race of people as being a particular thing. You're just misunderstanding the fact that just isn't a holiday that people in Mexico actually celebrate.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the other point being, if it's in your house and there's no one else there, even if it's if it's a party with your friends, and assuming none of it gets posted on social media, which maybe might not be a good assumption, but if it was just like a self-contained thing, like who cares, although that could be a slippery slope thing if you apply that to, like, I think
that's a slippery slope. Other things. If you make a racist joke with just white people around, that's okay, right?
Well, that's well, I mean, the example I was going to go to is like blackface, that kind of thing, where I would argue that if that's in your own house and no one sees that, that's still a bad thing, But back to stuff that's not so much like cultural appropriation type stuff. More like the capitalism thing. More like there are like structural racism, that kind of thing.
Sure.
Which I acknowledge definitely exists and is definitely a huge problem. But talking about it as racist in the same way and throwing the word racist around so much, while not meaning people who either have some kind of subconscious bias or just uneducated, or are like actively white supremacist. I feel like that kind of, when people hear the word racist being applied to these things that in their minds seem obviously have nothing to do with race, then it kind of lessens the impact of the word a little bit.
Yeah, I think so.
So to go back to this idea of privilege a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen any of this kind of language, but I see a lot, things like, no one speaks for all black people, no one speaks for all gay people, that kind of thing. And then along with that is also, well, maybe not along with that, and then other times, you see, you can find any person of a specific identity that believes a certain thing, like you can find black Trump voters, you can find, Hispanic Trump voters. Yeah. You finding those people doesn't mean it's the majority opinion at all.
Yeah.
Right. I know. I just feel like those two things are kind of in tension.
Could you explain a little bit more about how they're in tension? Yeah.
Well, because the people saying you can find anyone. Okay. So let's take a specific example, right? Which is, the whole Black Lives Matter thing. So basically, I feel like the mainstream idea is that if you're a white person, you should not be trusting your own instincts about about the problem of police violence because you don't have any direct experience with what it's like for Black people and specifically Black men. But at the same time, you can find plenty of Black people and specifically like Black intellectuals who will have the opinion that the problem is being at the very least overblown and is at the very least overblown. And yeah, one of the guys who I've become aware of like most recently is this guy Coleman Hughes, who's a philosophy student. I think he's still a student at Columbia. But he kind of got taken under Sam Harris's wing and has his own podcast, Conversations with Coleman. That's really awesome. People should check it out. And he has this article I'll link to. I think it's called Data and Stories, or Stories and Data, something like that. It's all about how the perception that these police killings happen so often is kind of inflated by all these viral videos that we keep seeing. And that compared to how gigantic of a country the US is, the fact that there's only like, I think it's like 70 or something of these that happen a year, is actually like, it's compared to the number of interactions people have with police every year. It's like, it's such a minuscule fraction of that. And the country's big enough that you would, it's never going to be that there are no unarmed people or no unarmed Black people that are shot every year. Right. And I mean, the other variable is, people will say this doesn't happen anywhere else. But the other variable is that, we live in the US and there's a Second Amendment, and any, police officer has good reason to believe that the person they're, apprehending could be about to pull a gun on them at any moment, and Coleman Hughes will also say that the number is probably still too high and it could come down more from where it is. But the idea that we could actually get to zero is probably unrealistic. And as long as there are, even a handful of those incidents every year, they're all going to get blown up on social media, and the perception will be that it's an epidemic still.
Interesting.
So yeah, I mean, I was, he says in that article, like he was, totally on the bandwagon with the whole Black Lives Matter thing. And, like he had this shirt with all the people's names on it, he wore that around proudly. And then he kind of became a little bit more disillusioned with it, with the whole movement. Well, part of the thrust of his article is that there have been a bunch of studies that have been done on rates of police violence, and there's links in the article, but basically if you adjust for the number of interactions people have with police, that actually on average more unarmed white people get shot per year. Do you know if that accounts for the fact that there's like 11 white people for every Black person in the country? Yeah, no, it does. Yeah. Well, so the reason there's kind of the discrepancy is that there's more police activity in poorer areas of cities, which tend to have bigger minority populations. Right. So it is disproportionately more unarmed Black people are shot based on population. But if you account for police interactions, it actually goes the other way. And so you could then ask the question, why are police having more interactions, right? And you could say that maybe that's the problem. And I think that's definitely a possibility. But it is true that that's kind of where the crime is concentrated in those poorer areas, right?
Yeah.
And I should say this has been like a right-wing talking point, and a lot of people have said it's irrelevant, and I'm still not quite sure what to believe. But this is all kind of make the point that that there is this very prevalent idea that you can't, if you're privileged, you shouldn't believe X because you're believing that based on your lack of experience or your lack of personal experience. Whereas there's this person who doesn't have that privilege who believes the same thing.
Mm.
And even if they're in the minority, they still, even if they're in the minority opinion, they're still just going off of their own experience.
I think you may have a really good point there, because I am really nervous to talk about this the subject that you just brought up as a white man. I somehow have the feeling that I shouldn't be talking about it, and yet it seems like a lot of the things you've said have merit, and I can't discard or discredit any of that.
Mm-hmm. I should add all those studies I mentioned, what they did find is that there is a higher incidence of like violence against minorities from police officers.
Yeah.
Non-lethal violence, but I mean, so there is definitely a problem, and there's definitely like systemic racism within policing. I don't think anyone's arguing against that. That it's a very specific argument that the numbers of unarmed black people being killed isn't actually disproportionately high. And along with that police killings of unarmed people is a problem just on the whole. Like it's not just black people. And again, that goes like right against the whole message of Black Lives Matter. So I'm wary of saying that.
Trevor, all lives matter.
So yeah, you were saying you're hesitant to even talk about it. Something.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's a reason that I should be hesitant to, but I do feel a strong reluctance to make any sort of stance on that. And I guess maybe it's just that I'm not super familiar with the data, and if I were to look into these ideas, that maybe I could form a stance one way or another, but it's hard to embrace one stance in particular over another when looking at data can I don't know. I don't know how to finish this idea.
Well, I think kind of what you might be getting at, or part of what ties into this is I haven't read all those papers word for word either. I have seen multiple articles by people I trust to be pretty unbiased talking about them. And it's not out of the question that they could have some kind of the papers could have some kind of error in methodology or something like that. But it kind of gets to, like, for a lot of these things, especially things that involve science, like no one can be an expert in all of them, and to some level we do have to trust authority figures,
right?
And just kind of put our faith in that we're putting our faith in the right people.
Jeez, that's scary. Maybe what I'm getting at is that it's valuable to be able to consider these ideas and to discuss them without necessarily needing to take one stance or the other.
What do you mean by that?
Well, rather than like saying, oh, these studies that you've just mentioned are definitely true, I'm trusting them, and therefore I'm going to take the stance that this whole thing is blown out of proportion and we're wasting our energies on this thing where we could be spending it otherwise. I could take that stance, but I'm not going to, because I understand that these particular data that point in this towards these facts may support a worldview in line with that, but they may be wrong as well, or they may be I don't know. I mean, just like being able to look at the data that you've just mentioned and consider some of the ramifications about it without taking some moral stance on it without saying, oh, these guys are wasting their time with this movement or whatever. Just to accept that these things might be true and it's worth talking about. It's worth learning more.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the main takeaway is that it is more complicated of an issue than people give it credit for, maybe.
Yeah.
Because it does just kind of get turned into this is so obvious. How could you possibly disagree with the fact that this is such a huge problem? If you do, like, I can't even be friends with you,
Yeah.
I don't want to hear it, you're not going to convince me. And again, in criticizing, in taking all this data into account, it's by no means saying that there aren't racist cops or that systemic racism doesn't exist within
Definitely
some or even most police departments, or that any of these cops involved in these shootings aren't racist, or so I mean some of them probably are, some of them probably aren't,
And I think it's valuable as well to consider why people get in this sort of reactionary state where they look at situations, they look at people disagreeing with them, and their reaction is to criticize and vilify rather than trying to have valuable discourse. Why does this happen? And I think it's essential to consider even anyone who falls into that is a person, and I think we can have compassion in understanding how that is, because sometimes someone will say something that you disagree with, and there's so many ramifications to them disagreeing that must imply that they haven't thought the thing through. But it's so painfully obvious to you. You think, how could they not have thought this thing through? And you come to the conclusion that they don't have good faith. They are not trying to have a valuable discourse. And so you fall into criticizing the person because you recognize that engaging in conversation with that person is not going to be helpful. I think maybe it's also important to recognize that impression might not actually be accurate, that maybe a lot of the time people who disagree with you do have good intentions. They just happen to come from such a wildly different background and social landscape that you don't have the same core understandings. And so maybe by discussing it, you can help them to understand your perspective. Yeah,
definitely. I think part of what that gets at is also again this idea of privilege, because I feel like specifically with I think you would use the word reactionary, which I think is I think it's a term that can kind of be weaponized against people. Because it can be applied to people who are directly affected by the issue you're talking about.
Yeah.
And if you're a privileged person and you're saying, oh, you're just, you're so reactionary, why can't you just have this logical, facts-based discourse about this issue?
Yeah.
That's the whole problem of privilege, right? Is that you can have this like removed perspective and quote unquote, objective, logical perspective on this issue.
Yeah.
And this other person is just reactionary and emotional and all that stuff, and so I don't think it's such a bad faith and reactionary don't necessarily go together, I don't think.
Yeah, I think you're entirely right on that.
So I guess to wrap up, maybe let's take it back to the whole actual intellectual dark web thing, because I feel like we maybe got a little little sidetracked. I don't know if I asked you this. How many of these guys / one woman were you have you like heard their names?
Only a few, I would say. Ben Shapiro, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, we didn't really talk about Jordan Peterson too much, but what a
it's interesting. I would actually like to discuss some of his ideas, because I think I very much disagree with him on some points, and he also seems to have some really fascinating ideas.
Yeah. He's been labeled, I think, king of the incels.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. I need to do some more research on that.
Does he sound like your kind of guy? Yeah, he's a whole can of worms. He said some pretty like shitty things.
I imagine, even from this short clip, there's certain red flags that made me think, oh, that guy thinks some things that I really, really do not agree with and are very problematic. Yeah. But he also said some really fascinating things regarding consciousness, and maybe we can explore that in another day. The whole can of worms, I mean. Yeah. It's interesting how kind of self-contained a set of people this is. Like I'm sure for a majority of our friends, like all these people besides maybe Ben Shapiro would be like totally off the map. You know, like I've never, maybe Joe Rogan too, but like I've never heard of them. No idea, you know. And that makes me wonder like how big of an impact it can really have. How do you mean?
Well, it kind of gets back to like a lot of this is happening in podcast format, and how many people actually listen to these long form podcasts that are going to get their mind changed by them. I don't know. Like it seems a little bit futile.
I don't know. I mean, are we trying to change the world by this?
I mean, I think they are.
I don't know. Maybe Ben Shapiro is.
I mean, I think they all kind of are or want to.
Yeah, maybe to some extent. I'm just thinking about that one instance where Shapiro is talking to Sam Harris and asking him how optimistic he is about the state of discourse, and Sam Harris kind of says, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think we're not going to have any problems with being censored. I think we're fine, but I don't know how that affects the global discourse.
He said he doesn't know how that affects the global discourse.
Yeah, paraphrasing.
I will say Sam Harris is by far, I think, the most level-headed of any of these guys, and the one I think I agree with the most about anything. Yeah, I should also say he's like pretty much been on the fringe of this whole group, and recently just completely disavowed it after.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because a lot of the people, I forget exactly what it was something about the election and Trump, and people just not. There's a video we'll link to where that'll kind of go into it. But yeah, I mean, it's always been like unofficial group, and he's kind of been on the fringes of it.
Too fringe for the fringe.
I mean, he was also kind of my doorway into this whole kind of podcasting long form conversation thing. And so I don't know. I have a little bit of a soft spot for him, you know, even if he says some kind of stupid shit sometimes.
Well, I think that's what all this is about, is maybe not disavowing people based on like one thing they said, and maybe just considering their ideas for what they are and embracing that, rather than throwing them under the bus for disagreeing on a single point.
Yeah. I think though we have to take things on a case by case basis, and I think this was something I kind of realized during, I think it might have been like the last big argument I had with Maddie about this kind of thing. I remember it was on a road trip, and we always get into these like intense discussions on road trips and stuff. Oh boy. But it was kind of the first time I was talking to her about Sam Harris, and And I was like, yeah, he really like set my head straight on this whole like free speech on college campuses thing. And then we started specifically talking about Milo Yiannopoulos. Do you know who that is? No. He actually, I remember he came to see you when we were there, and there were a bunch of people going to protest him. And I even like, there was like a Google Doc that was getting passed around to, what to say to people if they criticize you protesting him, or, I ended up not going, but, all the stuff about how, free speech free speech is kind of a convoluted term, and what does that actually mean? And not everyone has equal access to free speech and that whole thing. But I think he's definitely, this is kind of, what we came to is that, you have to take things on a case by case basis, because he specifically has like outed trans people at his talks, in a crowd full of people who would, want to actually, do harm to them.
Jeez. And
like, yeah, so like that's a case where it's like, no, he's just actually like harmful and actually like a threat, and shouldn't the ideal of free speech does not apply in that situation, because there's real possibility of harm,
malicious
to, like,
intent,
vulnerable people. Yeah. So yeah, I think you have to take things on a case by case basis, but yeah, in general, like it's good to kind of hear people out.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, this may be continued.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. We've gone on for longer than normal today.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we can discuss some of these topics more in depth individually for later episodes.
Yeah, definitely.
various regions. Function chiefly as enrichment of the harmony accordingly.